Just to get started, first of all, I'm thrilled that we're doing this, Anthony. So I'm excited, and I've known both Anthony and Michael for a number of years, and we've known each other through this sort of connection of my obsession with sound and music and their sort of collective obsessions with photography. So it seems like that sort of natural conversation to have. But before we get started, I wanted to give just a slightly more in-depth intro to both Anthony and Michael. Los Angeles-born guitarist and composer Anthony Wilson is one of the leading jazz musicians of his generation, known for a wide-ranging body of musical work that moves effortlessly across genre boundaries. In a solo career spanning 15 albums, including his Grammy-nominated debut with a 9-piece band, Wilson has creatively explored large ensemble jazz, the classic guitar, organ, drums, trio format, collaborations with Brazilian musicians, a chamber ensemble for 4 acoustic guitars, and storytelling through the art of songwriting. The guitarist of choice for singer, pianist Diana Krall for over 2 decades, Anthony has also performed and recorded with a diverse roster of artists that include Paul McCartney, Willie Nelson, Melanie Gardot, Barbra Streisand, Leon Russell, and Aaron Neville, as well as with jazz legends Charles Lloyd, Ron Carter, Bobby Hutcherson, Harold Land, Benny Wallace, and Anthony's father, the renowned trumpeter, composer, and band leader Gerald Wilson. So exciting to be here with you. For Michael, Michael Muller is a composer who translates the language of experience into sound. His wide-ranging work, spanning film scores, installations, and original recordings, emerges from a practice of deep listening, transforming both delicate human moments and the grandeur of natural phenomena into rich sonic environments. His compositions weave contemporary electronic elements with traditional orchestration, creating musical landscapes that obscure the boundaries between past and present. This versatility has resulted in projects including narrative films, scores for brands, and site-specific curation for institutions, one of which I got to sort of witness last year at San Francisco Muller, which was amazing. After 2 decades as co-founder and multi-instrumentalist for Balmaray, Michael's solo work focuses on the liminal plane where sound shapes consciousness. I'm particularly interested in that aspect of the work. Investigating the intrinsic ways music transforms space, time, and human connection. His early recordings were released by Deutsche Grammophon, the world's oldest record label, and featured collaborations with Vinkinger Olafsson, Heine Rani, Alva Noto, and Douglas McComb of Tortoise. Michael recently announced Ojas Music, a new label he co-operates with hi-fi designer Devin Turnbull, partnered with the Vinyl Factory in London. The label is dedicated to a pure analog process with a focus on deep listening. Their first release, Ona, right? An ambient piano collection between Muller and Deaf Center's Otto A. Tolkien, which just hit the streets yesterday, right? So watch for that. I'm very excited about that. Okay, so to get the conversation going, I just thought we could each take a few minutes, and for me, I can talk a little bit about my interest in and relationship to music and sound, and I would pass it over to you to get started. Just what is your relationship, both of you, to photography? Like, how is this connection being made? And what does that look like for you?
I think for me, I think of music and sound, and then visual things in the natural world, and then also 2-dimensionally in photography or in any art, of the balance between frequencies, the balance between light and shadow, the balance between negative space and form, and how these interact, and how these literally make you feel when you look at these photographs, when you hear a song. Like, it's kind of this weird magical alchemy. I've always found so much life in the kind of total subjectivity of interpretation, and angle of how you're seeing something or listening to something. And so I think that they are woven together. The Venn diagram overlaps quite a bit in a lot of mediums of art, but especially for me, taking cues from visual stimulation, and like, I make instrumental music, so there's no lyrics, there's nothing to bind a narrative or bind a concept really, other than some very obscure words which I make up to call a piece or call an album. But it's kind of similar to me, like music, and the things I hear inform how I see the world, and also the things that you look at, keeping up with people, amazing photographers like Ron and Anthony, who have a specific view of how they see the world. I hope that my music also comes from that same place of expressing like an emotional feeling that I find resonant, that I'm just happy to share that. Like, I know they do as well with their photography, just like finding these details that are significant to them, and then bringing it to a gallery or putting it on a record for everyone else to experience as well.
So, but you actually have a background as a photographer, right?
I mean, that's a generous title. Yeah, I used to do some editorial and commercial photography alongside doing music, and at some point I was like, okay, like, I'm just gonna focus on music. This is what I just really love. But yeah, so I think about the world, and I see the world still like with somewhat of a photographic eye, and I really appreciate it, deeply resonate with thoughtful photography. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Well, my experience of being touched by photography and images probably comes from around the same time that I was being touched by music as a very young person, because my mother is probably more having to do with being a reader, because I like to read, and my mother collected both records and books, and so she had all these wonderful records. I could just be 5 years old and take out Eric Satie piano pieces and the Rolling Stones and Dexter Gordon and any number of things, Ravi Shankar, and I would just kind of live in my own dream world, and then in and amongst all of these records that she had, which always had beautiful images on the covers, these jazz records with pictures of Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington and these kind of William Claxton and Jim Marshall photos. In and amongst the records were these books like Robert Frank, The Americans, and Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, Walker Evans and James Agee, and I was far too young to understand what was going on in these books, but I would just sit and pour through these books, even kind of popular photography books like The Family of Man, these kind of things, Life magazine, historical books of photography. She had some Gordon Parks, Sweet Flypaper of Life, Langston Hughes, and that's Roy DeGarava and Langston Hughes. And I would just, and for me to this day, one of the greatest books you can ever put in your hands that marries photography and text. And so I just created my own little dream world. I mean, I'm a kind of introvert, and this answered a need in me to have something that I could relate to, that felt very personal, and that had a meaning for me, that was very special. And so then I grew up. I always had some kind of little snapshot camera, and through high school and college, took pictures of friends, and as I walked through the world, and that just became a continuous practice for me. And as I became an actual practicing musician, and that became my sort of life and career, something about imagery and music felt complementary, especially as it pertains to books. There's something about the literary way of encountering photographs in books that reminded me of listening to music on albums, and how they unfolded and created special personal meaning.
And sort of dovetailing to that idea, could you talk a little bit about Songs and Photographs? Like what was that project, and what form did that take?
Sure. So I'm a jazz musician primarily. That's kind of the heart of what I do. My father was a jazz musician, and I've played a lot of primarily instrumental music over many years. Although high school, college, I was in bands where we wrote songs and sang songs, but I did really, after a certain point, really deeply concentrate on instrumental music, and made records and had a life doing that as a composer, my own bands, and kind of a player for hire. Over time, I became interested in the idea of seeing if I could try my hand at songwriting. So I started doing that, and I made a series of albums around songwriting. And that's a very particular craft and art. And you try to do it, writing lyrics can be really like flummoxing, just like, gosh, I can't make a lyric sound good. And so I tried various things, and eventually I got kind of up and running. And over time, one of the things that I found really helped me in writing songs with lyrics was my photography practice. And part of it is a kind of a street-based photography, walking around, being both super attentive and being in some way some kind of passive watcher as well. Somehow both very passive and very active, like just letting things be. And then as something comes into my vision that where I feel some kind of activation of presence and awareness, I would make these pictures, and I realized that I could start to write songs from the same kind of impulse, whatever was there, as long as I could sort of be there to receive it. This is something that photography taught me about writing and composing. And so I started writing from that standpoint, and during a period of a couple of years, I was making pictures, and I made an album where everything was kind of arising from the same impulse. And the album of music also is accompanied by a small book of photography. And it's very loose, and nothing is literal. It's all about kind of the feeling of watching, listening, waiting for something to emerge to my ear and to my eye that feels significant.
Okay. And just to touch on that for myself in terms of my relationship to music, I am in no way a musician. I'm kind of a super fan, is what I know. But my relationship to music and sound is pretty deep, especially at this point in my practice as an artist. you know, I have a nightly, literally nightly, except for when I'm in LA down at the hotel downtown, kind of an obsession with listening to music. It's usually between about 7 and 10 p.m. And the music ranges from Nancy Sinatra to Led Zeppelin to Anthony's music to Michael's music to much more experimental ambient music like Castle Jaeger. And it really gives me the opportunity in a really kind of non-hierarchical way to kind of engage music, and that directly informs my own sensibility of my own work in terms of the kind of eclectic nature of things that I'm interested in photography. So in that sense, I'm just kind of a usual fan of music, like a lot of people are. In a more direct sense, and Anthony, Michael, and I were just talking about this earlier, during the sort of editing process of my work, and even to some degree during the shooting process of my work, if I'm driving around in the desert in a car or something, music plays a great part in terms of getting me into a very specific kind of psychological space that then informs editing choices, sequencing choices. And I really can't overstate the importance of that aspect of, you know, the role of music in my practice. On a more kind of philosophical level, I think sound in general, and this is where this more experimental works that I listen to comes into play. I think, you know, we are sound, we are vibrations, and I feel like there's something fundamental about that relationship to the sort of harmonics of music that it's more than just a psychological space. It's something literally in our DNA about what vibrations do to our perception of the world. I don't want to go off down that rabbit hole. I truly believe that, and I feel like that's why it's so important in practice. Okay, that's my relationship. Okay, so dovetailing off of that, do images inform your sensibility as musicians, as music does for my image making? When you encounter a photographic image, what feels the most translatable between sound and image? Is it mood, rhythm, texture, structure, narrative, or something else entirely?
Simple question. I wouldn't say that the imagery directly influences like creative choices in my composition, but I would say it's like I mentioned earlier. There's something about the nuance of detail, how a frame is composed between negative space and what the form is or the subject, and those balances. So I think about that kind of gives, sometimes maybe subconsciously gives me ideas about certain instruments being put together, combinations of things. When I see some of Ron's photos, I think the first book I saw that I bought of yours was Lago when it came out. And having been through that part of the world and seeing that, seeing his interpretation of that, where it's so important as an artist to have a kind of a clear view, which I think kind of trusting your instincts as to what you're attracted to and how you can then internalize that and then bring out a song or bring out a piece of music from this internal place, from all these different influences. It's, I guess also I think of it the opposite way, where I have a piece of music and I need a visual representation to physically have a cover, even if it's just a digital song. Of course, if it's a vinyl jacket, like what image represents this music to me, which is not the easiest thing always. Sometimes the image comes before the music, where I'm like, oh, I love this image. I want to make some music that feels like the way this photograph feels to me. But I guess 2 or 3 years ago, Ron let me use one of his photographs from his 12 hertz collection of photographs, which is this kind of beautiful, mysterious shot of an iceberg facade. Is it an iceberg?
It's a glacier.
A glacier, sorry. Getting
Close enough.
a glacier. But it's this very wintry song that has a lot of like kind of bowed glockenspiel. So it has this kind of mysterious, kind of shrill, sort of cold sound, and this image was just like totally perfect. So in that case, yeah, it's like that image and the feeling of the song to me like really went well together. But that's kind of just for me, like that's the beauty of music and photography, that the art is defined and holds sway from the person who's perceiving it and interpreting it. That's the best.
And I have to say, it was no small thrill for me to see the Deutsche Grammophon label on my image. Yeah. Anthony, what about you?
Well, going back to something that Michael said early on, from the standpoint of things, concepts like light and shadow, foreground, background, subject, what is not subject, I think about these things a lot, just in composition in general, and I'm just gonna keep doing it. Keep turning it off.
Maybe.
I work with those concepts quite a bit, and I feel like sometimes that looking at photography, looking at visual art, helps me to understand how to organize composition, or even how to organize, say, a solo that I might play on the instrument, in terms of the rhythm that exists in a solo, the spacing, foreground, background, what are the themes that I'm working with, and motifs. A lot of things that I've observed in photography and visual art end up there in my compositional or playing practice. But in also a similar way to you, I have a kind of a nightly practice of looking at photography books. So I have my little chair, and I've been collecting photography books for decades now. And I live with these books, and I go back to them again and again, especially the ones that are the most important to me, and I read them like we might listen to albums, and I think about the pacing that exists in them, and the rhythms, and the kind of phrases, and the motifs that come up again and again, and I feel in some ways that doing that has helped me in music much more than straight up musical stuff. You know what I mean? It's that there's a way that it helps me relating to photography and images. It helps me to understand something about the music that, while it's not an exact translation, there's just some kind of analog there, some analogous process about the way something shows up to our senses as we take it in, and so that's really how it is for me.
That's really interesting that you say that, because and this ties into another question that I was going to ask, but that I have the inverse experience. In fact, I teach a class on photo book, and I've been teaching this class for the past, not as long as I've been with this gallery, about 17 years. And the idea of music constantly comes up, and the way in which you might think about structure and rhythm and timing and pacing, and just breaking down, melody, refrain, callbacks, and all of those things that I might find in a song or maybe in like a concept album that actually has very careful sequencing between songs. I apply that very directly to how I make a photo book. We're going through the exact same process, but I think,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's almost like what you're saying. These things tend to be for the artist. It may not show up for the person that is taking in the work that they eventually receive, but then something else is happening there, and they're completing that little loop of what came in, what we perceived, how we decided to organize it. And I just think with photography, it's just such a beautiful way that it kind of hits and has that sort of instantaneous impact so similarly to music. And, yeah.
that's great. Kind of curious, this is something that's been, I've wondered about, because this is great for me to be able to pick your brains. About, how much of your creative process is solitary and how much of it is collaborative? And how do each of those aspects of your practice shape your final work?
Well, there's a big solitary part of it for me. For instance, I'm working on a project and have been for about 8 years, and it includes both photography and music. And other than a few times recording some of the songs with other musicians and performing the songs a few times, it's a large group of songs. So kind of extracting a song or two here and there and playing a few in a performance, because I don't like having the thing just sit there in my own little private world. Other than that project has been completely solitary. But not completely, nothing is completely solid. So there's a lot of spending time alone. This project that I'm talking about, it's all centered around the Mississippi Delta. And so I've depended on people giving me directions, telling me where some secret space is, some special, sacred, mystical space is, things related to my family, because the project is related to my family history, staying in people's homes who are natives to the area, who let you in on what the place is about, or relatives that I've met. So even though I might then grab my 4x5 and be out alone in the landscape, it's very dependent on, there's research, there's a ton of research, genealogy research, so it can't just depend on me just being out there. But at the same time, I'm alone all the time. And if I'm home composing, I'm just alone, and I spent countless hours with this one, and but eventually collaboration is essential to what I do, because I like to utilize and invite the voices of other musicians in to bring some life to something that I was imagining, that I can only imagine in one way if there aren't other people bringing their life force. Or a big part of this project has become, and it's the last phase of it, a series of portraits. And I'm finding that portraits is the ultimate sense of collaboration. Otherwise, it's just using somebody, and I have no interest in that. I'm really, these are people that have some significance to our family story, to my life, and to how I've discovered a place. So I need to be in some kind of relationship with them and in some kind of collaboration in order for it to feel like it's really coming to life. So, and in my own practice as a jazz musician, we just need each other constantly, and that's the best part of it. Really is getting together with good people and playing and hearing what they do and feeding off of that. So.
I've played with a group and written for a group called Balmeret for like 20 years, which has been as little as 2 people and as many as 6 people playing together on a stage. So by nature, that is fully collaborative. After about 17 years of doing that, I was like, I want to try doing something on my own, which that took a while to get to that point. So my first record I made under my own name is just like a quiet ambient recording. There's a few other people on it. And I was like, this is fun and, made me feel good to go through that process. But I was like, it's like not that compelling. There's more that can be, that can come from this act. So the next album I made, I kind of had this blueprint and this idea conceptually of the kind of bedrock I wanted it to be, almost like a concept, like Low Tide is like, it's all kind of coming from the same sort of lower bass, and then every single track is a different musician on top playing with my loose direction. And I had something in my mind what I wanted, and sometimes it was exactly that, and that's fine, but other times it wasn't that. And at first I was kind of like a little prickly, or like not that. I was like, maybe we should try it again. And then I was like, wait a minute, like this is something different because this other voice is here. And I think once I realized that and kind of leaned into that, then it would become this beautiful thing that neither one of us would ever foresee happening in a collaboration. And that's been kind of a fun thing for me to do. Is I'm also very limited. I only can play a couple instruments, but I just released this record yesterday with my friend Otto, who's a beautiful piano player, and we have a very similar way of how we think about sonic landscapes in music, of having a lot of open space, and we really kind of hit it off in this way. And it's just nice it becomes something far greater. Like it's not a 1-to-1, it's not 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 5. Sometimes when you allow space, you can have your drive through the desert planned. I want to stop here, 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 and here, and photograph these things, and I need to meet this person and get invited into their house so I can take a portrait. And then sometimes you are getting gas and you meet someone and you follow them somewhere and find some new place, or you find a secret rock quarry or a swimming hole or whatever it may be that you would never have known about unless you were open to that. So I think that collaboration is kind of key. Yes, you can make photographs by yourself on your own terms, but there's so much more that can come from it when you're open to what the world wants to show you that day.
I love that broad idea of collaboration and what that can mean. There's collaboration in the sort of typical sense that we think that we're sort of sharing ideas, shading a piece, but then the sort of collaboration with the world that sort of ultimately shapes the movement and I think there are different ideas of what collaboration can mean. And for me, in my practice, typically it's a pretty solitary endeavor. I've collaborated in terms of the exchange of ideas a couple of times. Actually two of which were sound pieces. For Wago, I worked with Joshua Bonetta, who's a filmmaker and sound artist, and Wago was photographed around the Salt Sea down here in Southern California. And after the principal photography was done, I went with Joshua
and sort of revisited all of the sites and photographs along with a few other places that we, in a sort of very Ouija board fashion, allowed ourselves to be pushed into, like a shooting range, places like that weren't in the book. But what Josh did was he made field recordings. He did field recordings of everything from dropping a hydrophone in the water to sort of hear what the salton sea actually sounds like, to gunfire, to bushes in the wind, to pipes rattling, to coyotes and jackrabbits. And in doing so, he then went back to his studio, and much in the same way that I take all of the raw material of photography and go back into my studio and kind of shape it into something when it's a book. He took all the field recordings and layered them into these 2 20-minute compositions. And that, we called that Vago as well. And it ended up being released as its own sort of standalone vinyl record by Shelton Press. So I felt like that was like collaboration in that sort of usual sense that we think of the word. But then there's the collaborative element of, and this may be true for you guys as well, like when it comes to mixing and mastering an album, you're working with engineers, and when I'm making a book, I'm working with a publisher. When I'm doing an exhibition, I'm working with a gallerist. And all of those conversations that I'm having with those people becomes a part of the creative process in a pretty important way. So no matter how hard I may try to work in a vacuum, it's kind of impossible if you want to actually sort of engage the work out of the world somehow. So, let me see. Okay, I was kind of curious about, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but on the album art. Album art has been so important to me for so long. I feel like that was like my initial access to photography, like the most important access as a kid. And when you all are making, and Michael, you already spoke to this, but when you're making your music, ultimately it has to be, typically it has to be packaged in some sort of physical form, even if it's a digital release. There's usually some visual element that represents the music. Yeah, how does that, like, what part of the process is that? When does that happen? What are the choices based on? And you know, I've worked with both of you. In fact, I was pointing out to Anthony earlier, he did an album a few years ago called Collodion, which is a really beautiful piece if you haven't heard it. And the cover of that album was not that image, but it was the same shoot, the same day, it was the same foam that's represented in that. But I was so excited when Anthony reached out to me about doing it, as also Michael reached out about doing some cover art. That to me is, as much as I strive to be a part of the art world and make books and do exhibitions, like the most exciting thing in the world for me is to do album art, just so you know, by the way. How does that work for you all? Like, what part of it, is it different every time you do an album? Is it like, how important is it to you?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I guess like for my own music, it's sort of in the ambient neoclassical world, and I'm not like a singer or really a performer in a traditional sense. So it's not really about me as like a persona. That's not the point of the music. So it's nice to have beautiful images or a painting or one of Ron's photographs or something that is can visually represent how I want the music to kind of live in the world, and up into the point of transmission. So like I make the music, we record it, we mix it, we master it, it's put on a record, it's in your hands, and at that point, like I have nothing really else to do with it, which is so beautiful. So I want something that that feels right, and something that I stand behind. Like I adore Ron's photographs. My last album had a painting on it that a friend made that I've just fell in love with, and every time I would go to his house, I'm like, I want to use that for an album one day. And he's like, maybe. And then we ended up doing it. But it just like kind of felt it was in the right time, in the right moment. The photograph that we used of Ron's from 12 Hertz, just like I was just happened to be looking at that book when I was writing the piece, and I was like, oh man, it would be so cool to use one of these photos. And luckily, Ron was very gracious and let me do that. But I don't think it's kind of, for me at least, it's not really that. And I don't intentionally like look at something and be like, this is it. It just kind of hits me when it hits me. Like I would imagine when you're walking around in your rain boots, like making these photographs, you see a scene and you're like, oh, that's the perfect spot, and you figure out the lighting and then make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, records, well, there's so much that goes into them. So you may be making a record at some point and you have an idea that you would like some certain kind of cover, some kind of idea for the cover, but you might be working with a label that they have completely other ideas about how they want.
I was wondering about that. Yeah, you have to model something.
Sure, they want their things to look, and they have no interest in your little flights of fancy. So there are a lot, okay, we're playing jazz. We need to have the credit. We need to know who plays on the album on the front cover. Some label might say that's going to change how you do it. You just usually want to find a good designer who can help you realize something that's. We want a picture of you, and we need to know the musicians' names, and we want the logo on the front. So it's all.
I remember we had a back and forth.
Yeah. So I made an album also a few years ago, about 3 years ago. It's called Collodion, and it's very different from a lot of the things that I had done before. I played almost every instrument. I invited a few friends along the way, but it was quite a bit of electronics and ambient kind of process on it. For me, very experimental way of doing things, almost acting like a child in a space with a bunch of instruments and going into a studio completely unprepared and starting at the beginning of the day with no idea of how I would start. And the only goal was at the end of the day, at the end of the work, to have basically the body of a piece having been recorded. And so it was very different and abstract. And as I listened to the music, I've followed Ron's career for many, many years, and also this 12 Hertz pictures really, really have spoken to me, and I thought this would be a beautiful rendering of kind of it's not perfectly aligned with the music, but it's just enough to kind of do exactly what it needed to do. So Ron so kindly contributed to pictures, but I just did not want Ron's photography to get messed with in any way by ugly text over it or a logo being too big. And we had kind of a fight. I was in Germany working on something else, and
We weren't trying.
no, we did not fight. I actually was like, Ron, save us, please help us. Because just what they like to have the photograph in a kind of border, and then they have usually some kind of obtrusive font, and then no, what are you talking about, man? And so yeah, there's that kind of thing that can happen. And it's so important to you because you want to render, because growing up, especially in the vinyl space and the LP space, a kid of the 70s, opening up these records and whatever they were, whether it was a Led Zeppelin record, a Beatles record, a Blue Note record, the way that the object itself became so definitively a part of the experience is really so that you put that on and you're just in relation to the images there, whatever text, whatever sound is kind of coming at you, and you experience this record and this sound. That's that beautiful marriage that I think we're looking for, and it's very important, and there's just kind of different hoops from project to project that you jump through. The things that I've loved the most are these kind of things that Michael is describing, where there's just something that feels right about a person's work. It just feels like it marries well. You can find the right graphic expression for it, and the elements marry in the right way, and then hopefully a listener, viewer, can take that in.
One of my favorite covers of contemporary music is a Wojciech van der Molen's photograph on the cover of Michael's album from, what's the title of it?
Lower River.
Lower River. First of all, the music is amazing, but it invites you into the space of music in the most perfect way. And I think that when the photograph is doing its job as cover art, that's what it's doing. Okay, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I have kind of a slightly academic question that I'm kind of interested in. It's something I think about a lot with photography. It's about the role of, it's about the role of narrative in songwriting. Now, obviously, when you get into music that has lyrics, narrative, whether you like it or not, comes into play. A lot of the whole thing you do is instrumental, so it may not be as relevant. But I know with photography, narrative is inherent in the expectation of what we want from a photograph. I don't think it always succeeds in that, but there's that expectation. And so it's something that I have to think about and struggle with a lot in terms of how I want to either fall into that or exploit it or resist it. Does narrative, in that sense, like narrative in the most basic sense of like storytelling, does that enter into your creative process at all in terms of, are you thinking about that at all? Are you pushing against it? Are you embracing it? Or does it come into play? Sorry.
Well, in different things I do, it plays a part in different ways. Sometimes narrative might be just a sense of pacing, where are highs and lows, how do tempos, slow, fast, relate to each other and create a relationship that might even suggest a narrative. We're going from this to this. We're playing this song that has no words, for instance, and another song, but there might be a way, say, in crafting a set list on a show, that you really think about that.
Yeah, that would be
Sure. For instance, last night I played a show. There's a song that I've been. It's not even my song. I wanted to see how it would work in the middle of a set as kind of my metaphor was burning sage in between two kind of other things that had just super charged identities, and I wanted the sage burning to allow a space to happen so that people who listen could regroup and go someplace else, and then end up in this other place. We placed it in the middle of the set in one set, and at the beginning of the set in another set, as a kind of as a almost ritualistic burning of the sage, you know, to enter the space. We did it because there were two different audiences, so it can work in that way. So you're starting there in this space of purity, blank slate. Now where do we go? How do we pace? How do we pace things tempo-wise, density-wise? And you do create a story. It's abstract, and it's different probably for everybody who's listening. Record sequencing similarly has this kind of thing, especially if there's a side A and side B. That's one of the things we love about analog, is because there's that two-part situation where you listen to this thing and 22 minutes or so go by and you have to get up, and so you have those experiences. You find out how they play against each other. Even if it's instrumental music, you're dipping into different feelings and moods. With words, of course, it just becomes for me more literal, and I'm looking with groupings of songs to find out how can these work together and say something that is greater than the sum of the parts. You know, Songs and Photographs, my album, it's a lot about finding home and finding a kind of a place of belonging, but I didn't know that really. That those were themes though, and then to kind of find a way to give that shape across a record became a challenge, and there's a bit of a narrative there. So yeah, it's a trip.
Oh, I was just gonna say, again, it's about balance for me. Sequencing a record or playing a live show, like it can't be the same feeling the whole time. I mean, it can't, I guess it could be, but having arcs and having, highlights and shadows, and having a long piece followed by a short piece, or if there's a very intense song that's like sort of repetitive or kind of like not that easy to listen to, having the piece that follows it being like more serene and sweet or simple, just to kind of, obviously you can never please everyone with any sequence or collection of work, but I think that it helps if it's curated. I do a lot of deep listening sessions where I am in a space with a specific system, and it's about the experience and the physicality of listening to music in that specific space through this certain system. And I choose the music, and I choose this journey that makes sense to me, and it's so much more helpful when there's some forethought into that, and you start in a place that's easy, and maybe it gets more intense, and then there's a part that's smooth, and there's a part that's like stormy and dark, and then the sun comes out. There's like these different seasons throughout, like I would guess, like similarly in a book.
I was going to say, you just described the process of making a photo book. And I get that directly from music. The example I use, which is kind of a dumb example, but I'm cited every time, is Burning Sky by Bad Company. Dial it up on Spotify and listen to it in the car. It's like the perfect structure of the photo book.
Yeah, and there's also, like you were saying, like sides of a record, or will the photo go across 2 pages, and when it's printed, like there are these things you have to think about. Like if you know anything about vinyl records, when the needle gets to the inner part of the record, there's a thing that's called inner groove distortion. So like very sparse music, like if you're playing solo piano, putting it on a record, the dynamic range gets shorter because of the physical angle of the needle when it gets closer to the center. So if you have a very sparse song like that, you maybe don't want to put it at the end of the side, where it's like you have physical constraints, obviously. You want to hit when you open the first page of a book, the photograph. Maybe it doesn't want to. That's not the hero image of the book or of a show. You don't put it. You have to kind of lead into it in some way.
Totally. Yeah, that's perfect. How do we?
You want to open it up for questions?
Oh, yeah, we should do that if we're going to do it. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I'm thinking about the significance of time in both photography and music. Music is, time is the canvas, it's written on more or less, right? And in photography, it's a surface. And unless it's a book, maybe in a book there's time coming in, sort of.
Yeah.
But how do you see this relationship in the reception of music and photography? What kind of role does time play?
That's a really good question, and a question that was literally on my sheet. So thank you.
I was just reminded of this quote by my friend Nishant. We have sorry to call you out. We have a mutual friend who was reminding me the other day that Jean-Michel Basquiat said, "Art is how we decorate space, and music is how we decorate time," which I think is pretty a nice way to think about it. That it's the physical sensation of sound waves coming out of a speaker, in your ear or sitting in a space. It's a true impacting on you and a true etching on you. And even though photography is two-dimensional, it's the same thing. Like, there are images that will never leave you, and that anytime you see them, they will bring you back emotionally to a specific memory or a place in which you first perceived them, where they hit you. But so in terms of time, like, I think that both in photography and music and sound, it's a transportive medium if you allow it to be.
Yeah, and I think photography's relationship to time, obviously, it's time is captive, but there's also the sort of implication of time. I mean, it almost seems like a fragment of time. I think that there are different ways to either sort of restrain the impulse to think of time or to kind of explode the impulse of thinking of time. And I think the photo book is a really good example of sort of having your cake and eating it too. You have these captive moments, but you're also sort of, there's a nod to the sort of cinematic reference of image making that unfolds through time, through a sequence. And I think that's something I think about a lot in terms of a photograph that's not cinema, but at the same time, there's a certain expectation built around that. I think it's an interesting thing to kind of grapple with and explain at the same time. Yeah, I don't know where.
Well, in the captive time, the however long, 1/500th of a second, or 1/60th of a second, or 8 seconds, or 60 seconds in a really long exposure, or 8 hours.
Right.
However much is captive still holds. Keep doing it. Still holds all the time from before. So that ever existed up to that time in that place. I mean, these are such time pictures, by the way. I mean,
Yeah,
they feel like all time is just looking at you, and then so it's just something to think about, that there's that sense of captivity of time, but the sense that you walk into the continuation, even though it's stopped there. You're moving in to this continuation of time, and I feel that way about improvising. As an improviser, we practice around the grammar and the syntax of music and the rules of music and harmony, et cetera, and rhythm. But then there's this sense of now, move, act, be, go, and that sense of going and being in motion where the past keeps disappearing is also a beautiful part of it for me.
Yes.
Less of a question, more of a comment, but just thinking about album artwork, covers and things like that, just like, I'm like a 90s kid and skateboard walk growing up and the kind of LimeWire Napster days, but not to throw my brother under the bus, but he used to burn like fake CDs, as many of us probably did, and I remember I was so uninterested if he wouldn't put a little fake sticker on the CD and then like make the little album photo cutout in the plastic case. And I remember we would get in arguments because he was like, dude, like the music is there, like just, put it in your CD player, like I've already CD. I was like, no, but you have to put the cover because it's gotta be like the whole thing. I wanna look at it and kind of like feel associated with the cover that I knew was, supposed to be there. So just kind of brought me back to that, just talking about the importance of choices and how like, through your mom's art collection to a certain place and things like that. So also like nostalgia in a weird way.
Yes.
Any kind of
I'm just wondering about why, at any given photography installation in a gallery, there isn't music that is curated by the photographer to go with the images.
Well, that's an interesting question, and another question I had on the list, the sort of simultaneous experience of sound and image. I recently did a traveling exhibition of the 12 Hertz work, which was related to this work. This work kind of comes out of the 12 Hertz work. And in that installation, there was another sound piece by Josh Bonetta, a person I worked with on Logbook. And this was, again, a very collaborative piece. Josh came to Oregon, he did field recordings of some of the sites that I was photographing. He also, this is the really kind of fascinating part about this piece, he got seismic recordings from the sort of Earth Sciences Department here at the University of Oregon, and they're sped up to the point where you can actually, they're audible, you can hear them. And he sort of wove that together with the field recordings and created like a looping 20-minute piece. And we had a sound installation that traveled with the exhibition, so there was a sound experience with the pieces.
It enriches it, sure.
Yeah, no, and I that's something I'm really interested in for sure. Unlike, and that was something we very intentionally wanted to make an exhibition installation that consisted of sound and image, whereas the piece we did for Lago, there was a record, there was a book, and in no way, and I think some people were confused about this, were they meant to be experienced simultaneously. And we, I got a lot of questions. Should I put my headphones on and look at the book? And I'm like, well, you can, but you don't have to. They're meant to be parallel experiences. But it was a question that I was wondering about. You two, have you ever considered or have you ever done shows where images are a part of the show, where there's projections or films, or has that ever been a part of performance?
I've done it with songs and photographs. So where we projected the images from the book and played the music, and there's a bit of storytelling in there as well, and it's been really great. Sometimes I feel like it works better than experiencing the book and the recording together. John Gossage told me, he said, you just got to know, sometimes I'm not going to listen to your record while I'm looking at your book. He said, you just got to know that. Because it's tough. You're also, if you do include sound or music with image, at the same time meant to be heard while you're looking at this, then you're saying these do go together. And sometimes people might feel that it's changing their experience of either or both of them. I like it. I like the idea of it, but it's definitely
It has to be
difficult.
very deliberate.
Yes, and it's about the balance. Did the Dog Breath project have exhibitions that included your?
I think only the opening.
Okay,
Yeah.
because Michael participated in that piece where there's a book, and similarly to.
We stole Ron's idea, honestly.
Yes, so there's field recordings and came out on cassette, which is awesome. It's a beautiful project, Dog Breath is, and but yeah, it's, somebody might go, well, I just want to experience those images, or I think it works, but you can feel all
When
those.
you're watching a movie,
Yeah,
you're being fed, it's sweetened to that's how you feel when you're seeing the images. Why not do it with still photography as well?
Yes.
It's just interesting.
Yeah, I think on some level, it's probably a practical question. I mean, the 12 Hertz installation, we forced you to experience it that way. That's how we arranged the installation. With the book, I mean, I can include a CD of those same recordings, but then there's no, compelling reason to actually play it like early photographs.
Unless you're doing time-based art, and the music is natural.
Right.
this is why I love my sitting and looking at photo books at night and putting on whatever music, and I'm wondering what synergy happens.
I do
If I-
that too.
If I'm looking at John Gossage, The Pond, and I put what on?
Roy Buchanan.
Yeah, Roy Buchanan. Yeah, or if I put on some classical music, it's interesting to see how these relationships come into a dynamic relationship. Yeah.
Yes.
It just strikes me that with photography, you've taken a slice of time, and I think I'm a musician as well, and with writing music, it's almost helpful to have a pinned down moment, a grounded moment where it's not changing. For you, you are interacting with a non-moving partner. And it allows you to have a moment of meditation where you can interact with it and then tell your own story about what it means to you, how it's impacting you, how it might affect you, how it might be healing you, or what it makes you want to say, which is very helpful when you have a time-based form, because, and especially with music, you have the ability to tell the story musically in a structure that gives you that time. And so I feel like the narrative that happens is the one that's happening inside a person, and if there's 10 composers who are in the room, we would all have different pieces of music for the same photo, right? I think also it allows them meditation, and I guess what I'm working through in my head as I'm listening to you all speak is, how does a photographer, or how does a photograph maybe speak to us in a spiritual way, that have you had experiences where you experience the photograph, like you have experienced the meditation on a truth or a word about something that's been kind of otherworldly, and I just would love to know what those experiences.
So have I experienced a photograph in the way that I would experience on some sort of transcendent level, music or?
Yeah, I guess what I'm kind of playing around with is just the idea that music and spirituality are both these moving parts. And as you are uncovering your own story and self-understanding, and you're interacting with something stable, like an image, you're self-understanding and something, the interaction with maybe, depending on what your spirituality is, the spirit world is, that's the conversation that's happening. And I guess I just wanted to know, Any reflections on that?
I guess I find the sort of metaphysical experience much easier to access through music. I find it almost automatic. I don't know if that's necessarily true for everybody, but I mean it's almost like a meditation practice. That's 7 to 10 every evening. And philosophically, in terms of my ideas about image making and specifically photography, is that it's actually difficult to access because of the sort of concrete empirical nature of the medium. But it's my desire to sort of transcend and to sort of tap into something that's, and I would say that's especially true of this particular exhibition. And these are my attempts at doing that exact thing that I think you're speaking about. Sure.
Michael, you mentioned the word volume and talking about music and positive and negative space. And ironically, when you're in one field of art and you're sort of dealing constantly with one idea, you don't really think about how that which is applicable very much in photography is so applicable in sound. So I just wanted to thank you for that because it sort of just blew up in my mind. It was like, whoa, of course, it's negative, positive space, taking a look at bringing back. And that's exactly what happens in a photograph. So, yeah. This was great. This is really inspiring.
All right.
So I think we did.
Are we, all right, thank you. I just want to extend a huge thanks to Anthony and Michael. When I proposed doing this to them a month or so ago, I in no way thought it would actually happen. So thanks.
So awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Right.